Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Stargirl Season 3 review series. And today I am going to be talking about Episode 8, Frenemies Chapter 8, Infinity Inc. Part 2, which I have just finished watching. And this show continues to do what it does best, and that's deliver yet another top quality episode. And this episode pretty much picks up where we left off from the end of episode 7, which was Infinity Inc. Part 1, and this is Part 2 of the same name. And as always, I'm going to give a quick recap of what's happened, and then we're going to get straight into talking about episode 8. So, what we've seen so far is we saw the return of Alan Scott's daughter, Jenny, and she's on the hunt to look for her brother Todd Rice, who were both separated when they were kids. And we see that Todd Rice has been more or less taken over by an evil dark force, and we see him get kidnapped and taken to the Helix Institute, where we are finally officially introduced to Mr. Bones, who, as we all remember, was hinted at back at the end of season 2. And we see the Shade, who has reached out to Courtney to basically help him, Pat, all working together with Jenny to try and rescue her brother, Todd Rice. And basically what happens is we see Todd has been tortured by Mr. Bones, and he's been taken over by this evil dark force, as I mentioned. And we also see that Pat and the Shade end up being teleported to the Shadowlands, where Courtney was trapped back in season 2. And that's how we left that episode, on a bit of a cliffhanger with those two trapped. Also saw Yolanda finally having enough of her family and decides to move in with the Whitmores, as we saw at the end of part 1. We also see Rick's kind of been on a bit of a power trip or power rage, so to speak, now that he's able to sustain the power of the Hour Man. Instead of it just being a 24-hour limit, he's now got full control of his powers and it's unlimited, so he's pretty much going on a bit of a rampage. And we also learn in part 1, Jenny's Green Lantern ring has kind of meshed with the Shade's dark powers, so they're kind of like crisscrossing into one another. So they're looking to try and break that link so they can both live separately without having their energies clashed with one another. But overall, part 1 was very good, and as I said, it left us all on a bit of a cliffhanger, as we saw Pat and the Shade are trapped in the Shadowlands, which is kind of interesting because those two have never really got along, and Pat's always blamed the Shade for the breakup of the JSA. So it's kind of interesting to see how that's all going to play out. So with that all said, let's not waste any more time. Let's get straight into it. Let's talk about Episode 8, Frenemies Chapter 8, Infinity Inc. Part 2. So this episode picks up where we left off from the end of Part 1, where we see Pat and the Shade are trapped in the Shadowlands. So they've got to find a way to work together to try and escape. So pretty much what you're seeing here is the Shadowlands basically plays on people's worst fears. So it's kind of like a parallel dimension. So it's basically Blue Valley, but darker, so to speak. So we see Pat and the Shade are walking around a dark version of Blue Valley, and they come across the gambler, who we all know was murdered at the beginning of season 3. So we're nowhere near to finding out who's killed the gambler yet, and we see that although the Shade has full control of his dark forces, he's not able to use his powers in Blue Valley, which is quite interesting really, because you would think that he could just get themselves out of there, but it's not quite as simple as that. So We also see Todd Rice has been taken over by dark forces, and we see Jenny's trying to use her Green Lantern ring to try and help free her brother from these evil forces. And we see Courtney wakes up in a living room, and we learn a bit more about what's been going on here. Not too much, but we learn that the person who's been going around fitting in all these hidden cameras in Blue Valley and spying on Courtney, her friends, and her family isn't Mr. Bones. So that's a very interesting twist, because it appeared to me that Mr. Bones was behind the whole thing, but turns out that's not quite the case. And also, more interesting about this episode is we see that Mr. Bones not only has a much bigger part in this episode, we actually get a bit more of their backstory. So basically, Bones explains that Helix's patients willingly keep themselves isolated due to their dangerous powers. So it's kind of like what Xavier did with the X-Men. So it's kind of like that, just trying to keep them away from everyone so these people with special powers don't hurt anybody. So that's quite interesting in itself, because when you look at someone like Mr. Bones, he looks like a villain, which we are going to probably learn more about that later on, what his true intentions are. But it's interesting that we see this scene with this walking skeleton talking to Courtney about why they do the things they do. So I thought that was quite interesting in itself. And we see here that Courtney isn't afraid, even without her power staff, that she's still very much the hero. So it's nice that we got a little bit more of a backstory to Mr. Bones, that he's not just some walking random skeleton, scaring people. So that's quite interesting in itself. And also in this episode, we see the Shadowlands catches fire, which is like some sort of green flame that we're seeing. And we finally see the Shade and Pat are able to escape thanks to Jenny's power ring, and she's finally reunited with her brother Todd Rice. So that was kind of a nice moment here. And we also see Todd and Jenny leave with the Shade, as the Shade is going to teach them how to use their powers better. And we also see Love admits that she wasn't the one behind the cameras being all fitted around Blue Valley, that she actually did her research on everybody. So another interesting twist in itself. And we also see, as Pat and Courtney are leaving, we see that Courtney wants to try and patch things up with the rest of her friends. And as we move towards the end, we get a shot of the sewers and an underground base, and we see the same place where this person has been watching all of the JSA isn't Mr. Bones. We see someone in a hooded robe punching the security camera, which ironically enough had a shot of Rick, aka the Hour Man. So it looks like we're not quite out of the woods yet. And we also see that Mr. Bones hinted at maybe forming a team of villains. So very interesting to see how that's all going to play out. And that's pretty much how this episode ends. We see someone punching the screen, which had the Owlman's picture, as this episode is brought to a close. And there you have it. That wraps up my review. Overall, I thought this episode was absolutely fantastic, and this show continues to keep getting better and better every week. And I thought it was very interesting that it turned out not to be Mr. Bones who was behind all of the hidden cameras being fitted around Blue Valley, but it still doesn't answer the question as to who this mysterious person is and why they're doing what they're doing. But I thought it was nice that we actually got to see Jenny and her brother finally reunite. But as I said, overall, this was very enjoyable, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the rest of the season is going to play out. So that's going to be it for me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on episode 8? Did you enjoy it? What was your thoughts on Mr. Bones not being revealed as the one behind all the hidden cameras being fitted around? Do you think he could still be working with this mysterious person? And who do you think this caped figure was who we saw at the end? Could it be working with Mr. Bones, or could it be someone who's got their own separate agenda? And also, what was your thoughts on the Shade and Pat working together to try and escape Shadowland? Would you like to see more of those two work together? And also, do you think we could see Jenny become the new Green Lantern and join the JSA? And what about the Sandman? We heard his name being mentioned. Is it possible we could actually see him appear in the show at some point? And what kind of mentor do you think the Shade could be for Jenny and her brother Todd? Do you think he might be the one to convince them to use their powers for good, or do you think he could convince them to use their powers for evil? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Stargirl Season 3 review series, where I am going to be talking about episode 9, which I'm very much looking forward to seeing, especially with the way this episode ended, and I'm really pumped to see how the rest of this season is going to play out. So until next time, take care everybody and stay safe, and once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.